There is a lie that most people over 50 carry quietly in their chest. It doesn't shout. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there in the back of your mind at 2 in the morning, whispering the same 4 words. It's too late now. Too late to start again. Too late to fix it. Too late to become who you were supposed to be. I want to tell you something before this video goes any further. That voice is lying to you. And by the end of the next 40 minutes, I am going to show you exactly why. Through the story of a man named Walter, who believed that lie for 31 years, until the day he found out how wrong he was. If you have ever laid awake wondering what your life would have looked like if you'd made one different choice, this is for you. Stay to the end. Because the last 5 minutes of this video will tell you what Walter did with the time he had left. And it might be the same thing you still have time to do. Walter Higgins spent 34 years on the floor of a machine parts factory in Dayton, Ohio. He knew the sound of every press, every belt, every hiss of steam before his eyes even opened in the morning. The factory was not just where he worked. It was who he was. Then, on a Tuesday in October, they gave him a cake, a card signed by people who mostly didn't know his middle name, and a clock he never asked for. He drove home in silence. And for the first time in 3 decades, the house was quiet at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday. Nobody tells you what that silence feels like. It doesn't feel like peace. It feels like falling. Walter sat at his kitchen table for 11 days before he admitted something to himself that he had never said out loud. I don't know who I am without that place. That is where our story begins. Not with a triumph, with a man staring at a calendar with nothing written on it, wondering if the best of his life was already behind him. Maybe you know that feeling. Maybe it wasn't a retirement party. Maybe it was a divorce, a diagnosis, a child who moved away and stopped calling as often, a mirror that started showing you a stranger. Whatever it was, question underneath it is the same one Walter was asking, was that it? Is this all I get? Hold on to that question. We are going to answer it. But first, we need to talk about the lie that makes that question so much heavier than it needs to be. Here is something almost nobody says plainly, so I will say it now. Too late is not a fact. It is a feeling wearing a fact's clothing. Walter believed with total certainty that a man who was 61 years old with a bad knee and a factory pension had no business starting anything new. He believed his story was finished and all that remained was the epilogue. He was doing something very human and very costly. He was mistaking the shape of his past for the ceiling of his future. Think about that difference for a moment, because it matters more than almost anything else in this video. The shape of your past is real. Whatever you did or didn't do, whoever you disappointed, wherever you fell short, that happened. Nobody is telling you to pretend otherwise, but the ceiling of your future is not decided by your past. It is decided by what you do with the years still in front of you, however many there are. Walter had done the math on his life the way a lot of us do. Subtraction instead of addition. He counted the years gone. He never once counted the years left. There is a particular kind of grief that comes from mourning a future you haven't even lived yet. You grieve the version of yourself who should have started that business at 30. Who should have repaired that relationship at 40? Who should have taken better care of their body at 50? And in mourning that imaginary person, you neglect the very real one sitting in the chair right now. Still breathing, still capable, still here. Walter's turning point did not begin with a plan. It began with a single uncomfortable realization, which I want you to sit with too. I have spent more energy grieving the years I lost than I have spent living the years I have left. Say that to yourself, not to feel guilty, to feel awake. Now, I won't pretend regret is simple. It isn't. And I won't insult you by telling you to just let it go. Because if it were that easy, you would have done it already. Walter carried a specific regret, one he had never told anyone, not his late wife, not his daughter, not a single soul in 31 years. When he was 28, a friend from the factory floor asked him to invest in a small tool repair shop. Walter said no. Too risky, he told himself. A man with a new mortgage doesn't gamble. That friend's shop grew into a regional supply company. Walter watched, year after year, as that same friend built something Walter believed he could have built if only he'd said yes. For 3 decades, that no sat in Walter like a splinter. Every time the friend's name came up, Walter felt it, a small, sharp reminder of the life he imagined he was supposed to have lived. Here is what Walter did not understand for a very long time, and what I need you to understand right now. That regret was not proof that Walter made the wrong choice. It was proof that Walter was capable of dreaming bigger than the life he'd built. And that capacity, that hunger, had never gone anywhere. It had simply been sitting inside him, unused, waiting. Regret, when you look at it honestly, is not a verdict on your past. It is a compass pointing at what you still value. If you regret not spending enough time with your children, that regret is showing you that connection still matters to you. And there may be grandchildren or nieces or neighbors' kids still within reach of that same love. If you regret not taking a risk, that regret is showing you that courage and ambition are still alive in you. Dimmed, maybe, but not dead. The tragedy is not that Walter said no at 28. The tragedy would have been believing at 61 that the part of him capable of saying yes had died along with that opportunity. It hadn't. It was just waiting for him to notice it again. 6 months into retirement, Walter's daughter, Ellen, asked him to fix a wobbly chair at her house. It was nothing. A loose joint, a stripped screw. Walter fixed it in 20 minutes. But something happened while he worked that he didn't expect. He forgot about the clock. He forgot about the silence waiting for him back home. For 20 minutes, his hands remembered a kind of purpose that had nothing to do with the factory badge. Ellen said something offhand as he packed up his tools. "Dad, you should do this for people. Half my friends have furniture falling apart and nobody who actually knows how to fix it right." Walter laughed it off. 61-year-old men don't start businesses, he told her. But that comment followed him home. And that night, for the first time in months, he didn't sit in silence at the kitchen table. He sat there with a pencil and a piece of paper, and he wrote down a single sentence. What if the chair wasn't nothing? I want to pause here because this is the hinge of the entire story, and it's a hinge available to every single person watching this. Walter did not have a dramatic epiphany. He did not wake up one morning transformed. He had one small moment of unexpected purpose, and instead of dismissing it the way he dismissed 100 small moments before, he let himself wonder about it for one more night than usual. That is the entire secret, not a leap, a willingness to wonder for one more night. Most people extinguish these sparks before they get the chance to catch. A grandchild says something kind. A stranger compliments a skill you forgot you had. An old hobby crosses your mind for no reason. And the automatic response, the practiced 30-year-old response, is to think nice thought and go back to the couch. Walter almost did that. The difference, the entire difference between the next 10 years of his life and the version where nothing changed, was that he picked up the pencil instead. Here is where I need to challenge something you may believe about the years behind you. You may believe your age is a debt you now have to pay off. Fewer years ahead, less energy, less time to catch up. I want to offer you a different way of counting. Walter did not walk into retirement empty-handed. He walked in with 34 years of knowing machines the way other people know their own hands. He knew tolerances, materials, how things wear down, how they fail, how to listen to a squeak and know exactly what it meant, none of that showed up on a resume anymore. None of that was in the 61-year-old body he sometimes resented in the mirror. But all of it was still in him. This is the part almost nobody tells people your age. So let me tell you plainly, 4 minutes, the years you spent were not spent. They were invested. Whether you were raising children, working a job you didn't love, caring for a sick parent, or simply surviving hard seasons, every one of those years built something in you. Patience, judgment, the ability to tell what actually matters from what only looks urgent. The kind of steadiness that a 25-year-old, however talented, simply has not had time to earn yet. Walter's 34 years on that factory floor were not the opposite of his new beginning. They were the foundation of it. Every chair he would go on to repair, every piece of advice he would later give younger tradesmen, every dollar of the small business he eventually built, all of it stood on ground poured 3 decades earlier. You are not starting from zero. I want you to hear that clearly. You are starting from everything you have already lived. The only question is whether you will let those years be dead weight you drag behind you or fuel you finally learn to use. Walter's first customer, after Ellen's chair, was a woman 2 streets over with a dining table her late husband had built. She couldn't bring herself to throw it away, and she couldn't afford a real furniture restorer. Walter charged her $40. It took him a weekend. When he delivered it, she cried at her own kitchen table. He didn't tell anyone how much that moment meant to him. But that night, for the first time since the retirement cake and the unwanted clock, Walter slept without the specific hollow ache that had followed him for 6 months. By the following spring, Walter had a small waiting list. By the year after, he had a workshop in his garage, 3 regular part-time helpers, one of them a laid-off machinist half his age who needed the work as badly as Walter had once needed a reason to get up, and a modest, steady income that had nothing to do with a pension. He was 63 years old when he told his daughter over dinner, "I think I'm better at this than I ever was at the factory." It wasn't really about the money. Walter didn't build an empire. He built something smaller and, in its way, more important. A reason each morning made sense. I want to be honest with you about something. This chapter of his life did not erase the earlier ones. Walter still thought about his friend's supply company sometimes. He still had days where his knee ached and his patience was thin and the old grief crept back in. Starting again does not delete your history. It simply refuses to let your history be the final word. Walter is 74 now. He no longer does the physical repairs himself. His hands don't allow for the fine work anymore. But 3 days a week, he still drives to that garage workshop, now run by the machinist he once trained, and he sits in an old chair by the window, answering questions, telling a young apprentice which materials will outlast a customer's grandchildren. Last year, at a small dinner for his 74th birthday, that same young machinist stood up and said something Walter has never forgotten. "You didn't just teach me how to fix furniture. You taught me that 30 years in one place isn't a life sentence. It's just the first half of the story." Walter, a man who spent 31 years believing his story was already written, cried in front of 11 people at his own birthday dinner. Not from sadness, from something closer to relief. If you have made it this far, I want to ask you something directly, the way Ellen once asked her father about a wobbly chair. What is the small, unexpected spark you have dismissed lately? The hobby you haven't touched in years. The skill nobody has asked you about in a decade. The conversation that lit something up in you for 30 seconds before you told yourself it didn't matter. You do not need a dramatic transformation. Walter didn't get one. He got a chair, a pencil, and one more night of wondering than he was used to giving himself. Your years were not wasted. They were stored, waiting for the moment you decided to spend them differently. That moment can be tonight. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments what your chair is, the small thing you've been putting off. And if you know someone who needs to hear that it's not too late, send this to them tonight, not tomorrow, tonight.